Welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how you can build an awesome progress bar in Excel and how you can use it in your own personal applications. This is going to require a bit of VBA code, however I will make sure to cover every single line of code so that you can follow what is happening. It is worth pointing out that there are many different ways how you could build a progress bar in Excel. For example, you could use an ActiveX control, or you could use your status bar. However, based on personal experience, I prefer a user form based solution, which is going to be the focus of this tutorial. Alright, now for this tutorial I've created a very simple macro that adds 300,000 numbers to column A, and we are using a progression bar, a progress bar, in order to visualize the progression. And I've already given you a preview of how the progress bar looks like in the intro of this video, but actually let's show it once more. And as you can see, it's a very nice and even flow of the bar. And right here, you can see that I'm tracking the time it takes for the code to complete. And that's a really important thing with progress bars. They can significantly reduce the performance of your code, which happens when you have a high number of iterations to make. In this case, we are adding 300,000 values to column A, which means we have to make 300,000 iterations in the code. And if you were to update the progress bar every single time, that would significantly reduce the performance of your macro. And now to put this into perspective, let's run the same code, but without the progress bar. So it's basically the raw performance. And let's see how that compares against the against the progress bar. And as you can see, in both scenarios, we get the same performance. So it's 6 seconds in either scenario, which I think is a very promising sign. All right, and now let's actually look at the code and how we can design and build the progress bar. Let's get started. Okay, so now we are in the Visual Basic editor. If you don't know how to get here, just press Alt F11 on your keyboard. And as you can see, we have one user form and one module with the code. Let's begin with the user form. If you don't know how to insert the user form, just right-click anywhere inside the project window, insert user form, and this would create a new blank user form. But I already created one for you. So we double-click this, and this is our user form. And there's actually not much to it. So there's only a label control that you can get from the toolbox. If you can see the toolbox, just go to View and select Toolbox. So what you would have to do is you would have to add the toolbox, just drag and drop, remove the caption, enter or change the back color, choose a color of your choosing, optionally give it a border style, give it a border, and ideally also give it a clear name, because label 1 is not very, it doesn't really say much. And that's actually it. Now, to create the impression of a bar that is continuously progressing, all we are doing is change the width value of the label control. At the beginning of the macro, it will be set to 0, which makes it basically invisible. And then we just add to this. So it may start with 10, and then we will give it a value of 20 until it hits the border of the user form, which would indicate that the code has finished. So it's a very simple trick, but it goes a long way. So it's it's a really creative solution of creating a user form. And there's a bit of code inside the user form, and to get to that code, you would just have to double click inside the user form, which will take you to the code. And I already set up an initialize event. Initialize is triggered when you load the user form. So every time the user form is loaded, this code will be executed. And I'm just going to briefly tell you what the code does. The first thing I always do is I set the height and the width, because I experience a lot that user forms start to resize for no apparent reason. So I always like to make sure that the dimensions are fixed and that they are always resized when the user form is loaded. those values, 46 and 400, those are arbitrary values. You can use values of your own depending on what you prefer. Next is the draw buffer property, which you can also find in the property window of the user form. It would be, it's right here. And by default, it is set to 32,000. However, I'm setting this to 64,000 for this code because you tend to get a problem with user form flickering. So the progress bar, it likes to flicker when you continuously update it. So, and you can prevent that by simply increasing this value to 64,000. The next thing is changing the startup position. The problem that you may experience when you're working with multiple monitors is that the user form is not displayed on the active monitor where your Excel application is, and that's because VBA or Excel is referring to the Windows settings where you set up the main monitor. And in order to make sure that the user form will always be placed in the middle of the active screen, you would have to include those 3 lines of code. And last but not least, we set the progress bar and we set the width to 0. So this is the name of the progress bar, LB prog bar. This is the width property, and we just set it to 0. And that's actually already it. And now we can move on to the code, which does all of the heavy lifting. Okay, so now it's time to look at the code, which you can find in the macros progress bar module right here. And in this module, you will find 5 different procedures. The main procedures are prog bar update and prog bar. Starting with prog bar, you will find that we first declare 3 different variables. We have current iteration, which will always tell us at what iteration we are at any given point in time. We have target value, which is the maximum number of iterations we have to make. For example, if you need to create, say, 50 PDF documents, then the target value is going to be 50. Or as in our case, if we're going to add 300,000 values to column A, then the target value is going to be 300,000. And next we have an optional variable, update count. And update count is the number of times you want the code, the progress bar, to update. And if you have a very high target value of, say, 300,000, then you don't want the progress bar to be updated all the time. That would slow down the code massively. In such cases, you want to only update the progress bar a specified number of times, and that's when we use the update count. So only use it when you have a really high target value. So target value is 300,000, and now the update count is 150, meaning we want to update the code 150 times. And you can actually play around with this number. For example, if we choose a number of 10 and then run the code, then you can see that the progress bar only updates 10 times. But now I'm going to increase it to 100. And this will look a lot smoother. But it's not perfectly smooth. And you will have to find a value for yourself that makes sense and where it looks smooth, if that's what you want. But be careful. The higher the update count, the slower the code is going to execute. So don't use an update count that's too high. But you have to play around with that and what works for you. But generally, you will be able to find a solution where it doesn't slow down the code and where it looks like it's seamless. So just play around with this. Next, we show or we load the user form itself. So form progress bar, which is the name of our progress bar. And then we show it. And now we declare it as a modeless user form. With user forms, you have 2 options. It can be a modal user form or a modeless user form. By default, user forms are always modal, meaning that when the code gets to this point, it will stop and it will only continue after you manually close the user form. However, in our example, We don't want this. We want the user form to be loaded while the code is working. So that's why we have VB modeless as a property or as a parameter, which means that the code is going to continue. Next, we initialize the loop. So we want to go from our smallest value, which in our case is 1, which would be the first row, to our target value. So that would initiate a total of 300,000 loops or iterations in our example. And this is where you would add your own code. In my example, I have written a code which adds values to column A, but here you just have to use your own code. And then you add on error resume next, which is going to ignore all kinds of error messages, because by default VBA is going to produce a prompt which informs you that an error occurred. But we would in some cases expect some errors to happen, but we don't want the code to stop. So that's why we have on error resume next. And only after we declare on error go to 0 is the regular incl behavior restored. And now you have to choose between two different scenarios. If you are working with an update count, and if you only want the progress bar to be updated at certain points, then you use this piece of code. But if you want to update the progress bar all the time, then you comment this out, or you just remove it completely, and you uncomment this line of code. And now this is going to update the code all the time. The progress bar, I mean. But I want to focus on this scenario. And it's really important to understand what's happening here to understand the mod function, because the mod function allows us to update the progress bar only at specified points in time. And I want to explain the mod function a bit better using the spreadsheet. All right. I briefly want to illustrate what the mod function actually does, because it's a very powerful function and most people are unaware of what it's capable of. Now the mod function, which is also available as a spreadsheet function, it takes one number and divides that number by another number and returns the remainder. Now in this example, we have 300 iterations, giving us a target count of 300, and we want to update the progress bar. After every we want to update it a total of 10 times, meaning that after every 30th iteration, we want to update the progress bar. If we go to the 30th iteration, you will find that the mod function, which is in column B, returns a value of 0. That is because if you divide 30 by 30, then it gives you a remaining value of 0 because you can make a clean division and there's no remainder. However, if you divide 31 by 30, then you can make one clean division, but you end up with a remaining value of 1. And you will keep getting a remaining value until you get to 60. Because if you divide 60 by 30, you can make 2 clean divisions, and you end up with 0 as a remainder. And the VBA code only updates the progress bar if the result is 0. So only update it here, and of course after this 90th iteration, and so on. So after every 30th iteration, it's going to update the progress bar. Okay, so if the mod function returns a value of 0, then we are going to call the progbar update procedure. And now this procedure is responsible for increasing the width of the label control, thereby creating the impression of a user form that updates. And this procedure is expecting some input. I have declared a variable called progress%, which is a variable of the double type, meaning that it can hold decimals. And this procedure is expecting the current progression expressed in %. And to get that number, we simply divide the current iteration by the target value. So if we have made 100,000 iterations so far, and we have a target value of 300,000, then the current progress would be 33% or 0.33. And to pass on that value to the progbar update procedure, we simply add this term inside the parentheses of the progbar update macro. So this is how you pass on a variable to another procedure. And now the procbar update procedure, it takes that number. So in that example, it would be 0.33, and it would increase the width of the user form label control based on the percent, the 0.33, and the width of the user form control. So right now, the user form control has a width of over 700, and it would multiply that number by the percent and thereby increase the width of the label control. And because it's based on the user form width, the label control actually works regardless of the size of the user form. It's going to adjust accordingly. And after we increase the width of the label control, we are going to update the caption of the user form. The caption can be found at the top of the user form. Right now it says 0%, and we wanted to update continuously. And we are also going to use the format function, because by default it would just say 0.33, but we wanted to say, for example, 33%, or we want to have it say 50% instead of 0.5. And that's what the format function does. It takes the percent and actually translates or converts it into an actual percent number that we would expect. And now the last thing we do is we are updating the user form using the repaint command. The repaint command refreshes the actual user form. If we were to comment this out and then run the code, then you would see that the user form, it doesn't update, or you can't see the progress bar. And that's what the repaint command does. It actually makes the user form, it forces it to refresh, allowing us to see the progress bar. So it's really important that you have the repaint command. And now we return to the procbar function procedure. And when the code is completed, we are running the procbar update procedure once more. And now we pass on a value of 1, meaning 100%. And we do that to make sure that the width actually reaches the maximum, or the end of the user form. Because when we are working with odd numbers, it may happen that we cannot have this happen automatically with this piece of code. So this is just to make sure that when we are working with odd numbers, that the user form actually, or that the width of the label control is actually reaching the end of the user form. And now we are simply unloading the user form. Unload just means it's going to unhide, but also exit the user form, because right now we are finished and we've actually reached the end of the line. So this is how you create a progress bar in Excel. It's worth pointing out that there may be some scenarios where the progress bar is not going to work as intended. For example, right now I'm scraping information from a couple of thousand Instagram links, and Excel has to constantly send requests to those websites. However, as you can see right now, Excel says not responding, and you have the so-called white screen of death. And in those situations where Excel has to work really, really hard, the screen becomes unresponsive and it's not going to update. So in those situations, unfortunately, a progress bar would simply not work.